Hello and welcome to Season 2 of Inside the Therapy Room. I'm your host, Sam Sellers. I'm a registered therapist, a wife, and a fur mama, and I'm passionate about breaking down the barriers and stigma attached to therapy. I want to begin by first honouring the traditional custodians of the land we live and work on. Today, Kim is on the land of the Kulin Nation, and Sam is on Gundungurra land. We pay our respects to the elders past, present, and emerging, for they hold the memories, the traditions, and cultures of our First Nations people. We must always remember that the land below our feet is, was, and always will be Aboriginal land. As you may notice, this season has more than the usual 10 episodes. That's because Inside the Therapy Room is finishing up. But don't worry, there are still 2 more episodes to come after this. Today I'm chatting to Kim Billington. Kim Billington is an author of 2 counselling books and is a PACFA and ACA clinical registered supervisor and counsellor who enjoys the balance of working online and in person with private clients, families, and adults, as well as training workshops. Kim works with experienced counsellors providing individual and group supervision, as well as part of the clinical supervision team at Monash University in the Masters of Counselling Placement team. Previously, Kim has worked with women and children in family violence agencies, with men in men's behaviour change group programs, and in telehealth with Men's Line and Beyond Blue, as well as a generalist counsellor in not-for-profit agencies. Kim loves cold water swimming and is a happy campervan traveller who has found ways to work remotely, as well as being with her 2 young grandchildren in Melbourne when she is at home. Today's episode is all about narrative therapy. We hope you enjoy joining us inside the therapy room. Welcome, Kim. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Sam.
I specifically, as you know, wanted to find a narrative therapist for this season because by the time this airs, but at the time of recording, I'm actually about to launch another podcast that's very centered around storytelling. And so I am big on the power of story and rewriting a story and that sort of thing. So I really wanted a narrative therapist for this season of Inside the Therapy Room. So thank you for joining me. So I'm excited about this episode. So let's start with, what is narrative therapy?
Well, you've got to look at where it began, I think. The history of something is very important. And so in the 80s, these couple of social workers, Michael White, David Epstein, they're kind of like really kind of buzzy kind of people. And there were enough opposites in personality that they worked well together.
Okay.
They worked with families and people with really deep problems that often the medical field had kind of given up on. So psychological problems, but they weren't psychologists. If anything, they could be called family therapists. And when they started doing their work, they were really interested in something called solution knowledges. So that's not solution focused brief therapy where you ask a miracle question and say, okay, let's get there, what's the obstacles? It's the knowledges that someone develops over years from their early childhood of how to respond in life. There's some people say, there's some maladaptive responses, but at the time they were, the perfect response for that situation, big T, small t trauma, whatever. Yeah. And so they were interested in each individual's solution knowledges, how they got through hard times. So, they were really just unique for their times, and they went and presented at all these family therapy conferences and in America, and they kept saying, what are you going to call yourselves?
Yeah.
And they no, we don't want a name, they said, because we want it to be fluid and free. And then someone said, because you're inviting people to tell their narratives and you refer to people's stories as their narratives, maybe you should call it narrative therapy. So they kind of went along with it and it stuck.
Right. And correct me if I'm wrong, these guys are Australian and New Zealand, right?
Yeah.
So often we think that all of the, the sort of methodologies and practices and stuff in the therapy world are all overseas. They're all in
That's
Europe
right.
or in the
Yeah.
US and things like that. But this is homegrown almost for
That's
us.
right. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So all about the narrative. So what is narrative therapy?
So basically, we understand, as every practitioner does, that people don't pick up the phone and book a session unless they've got a problem. Like no one would book a session and come in and go, "Oh, I've just had a great day, great
Breakfast was
Christmas."
good.
Yeah. No, that's the
Yeah.
thing. People in this, century and second half of the last century in particular, people started to know that there was something not feeling right. Didn't want to maybe burden people, so they would go and see a counselor or psychologist. And in narrative therapy, we're listening with two ears. Most people have got two ears. One ear, we're really interested in listening to the problem or problems.
Yeah.
I always say to the supervisees, don't be satisfied with one problem. Ask them what are the three top problems?
Yeah.
Especially given that the initial problem brought is often the crispy covering of the onion, and there's all these layers underneath, these soft layers, that make people cry.
Yes.
And so we're listening with one ear to the problem story, how it's narrated, what metaphors are used. If there's any kind of self-blame, we're just really listening. And the other ear is listening for what we call alternative narratives, or the alternative story. These are unique moments in someone's telling of their problem when either they pushed aside the problem and just got on with going somewhere, or they found that in the mornings before the problem really got worse, they would make some sacred time for something. So we're listening for these kind of personal identity solution knowledges around what's meaningful in life, what you want out of life. When if the problem's to do with, say, domestic abuse, it's like someone says, I just knew it wasn't right, but I couldn't think of how to manage it with the kids. And it was like, how did you know that it wasn't right? Tell me about that.
Yeah.
That's the story of that person's, what they've made of their life, how they've made sense of life. So narrative therapy begins with this double listening, it's called. And then if someone names a problem, we kind of want to externalize it. So for the classic is, I'm naughty. The child might come in, I'm naughty. I've got a temper. I'm just a bad kid, not like my older sister, whatever.
Yeah.
And we go, so temper visits your house. What time does temper arrive?
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. And so tell me, when you were a brand new born baby, brand new, just been wrapped up for the first time in something, did you have that kind of same thing where people were looking at you going, oh, that's the naughty one, he's got the temper? So it kind of makes you tingle at times when kids in particular experience us externalizing the problem. And then we might say something like, oh, are you up for some homework? Do you want to interview mum and dad about whether, when they were little kids, was there a temper problem in their family? And I've got a little a little $2 shop trophy for prizes here. I usually hold that up if I'm in online, and I'll say, who would have got the champion anger problem from when, before you were even born? Who would have had that in your dad's family? As children realize that actually this isn't internalized in them, it's something that happens in families. And the same in that externalizing, the same with, say, an adult comes in and just says, I'm depressed. I've been depressed for months now. It's episodic. And we say, so this depression, we might even begin in the deep end. Narrative therapy spins these amazing questions. We might begin in the deep end and say, so do you want more of this depression or less? Yeah. There's some very cheeky questions that kind of come up that cut through, and people respond out of their values. Like, no, it's not fair. Okay, so when did you experience a moment when things were more fair? That kind of thing. When did depression come knocking on your door? Were you 8, 10, 15? Because actually that's the kind of age. So again, solution-focused therapy. People are always saying, oh, narrative therapy, that's like solution-focused therapy. But solution-focused therapy isn't interested in lingering or loitering
No.
with intent in the early years experiences and the arrival of problems, like anxiety. I always say, it would tell me what happened in kinder. Do you remember when your mum dropped you off or whatever? It's
Yeah.
and it's not going to get dragged down into the trauma story. In fact, we definitely, if there's been a big T trauma, we don't go into that. We say, how did you respond to that? That happened to you on that. Should we call it the terrible Saturday night?
Yeah.
Should we give it a name, externalize it? So on that terrible Saturday night, what was feeling in here? Did you feel that this is wrong? Were you angered by something that happened around that? What was going on for you? What was your response to that? And again, people come up with these value laden actions they took. Michael White said there's no one is a passive recipient of abuse, right? So given that, in narrative therapy, we're really curious. In what way did they try and stop it?
Yeah.
Did they just know it wasn't right?
Even if it's just a feeling.
Absolutely, yeah. And
Yeah.
that got that example of an adult who said to me, when the abuser was in the house, so it was a family member that visited, that she would stand behind the sofa when everyone was watching the TV and pull her tongue out at that person. So the back of the heads, everyone's watching TV, and she would pull her tongue out and then walk out of the room. And that was her way of saying to herself,
yeah,
I don't like that.
Yeah.
I don't like this person coming doing that. So that's what we're after. And that gives people dignity, that they didn't do nothing.
Absolutely. It's a really strengths-based, non-blaming approach, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
I hear often when people talk about narrative therapy, that the problem is the problem, the person is never the problem.
That's
And
right.
so it's that separating of and being able to not absorb what's going on around you or what may have been done to you without consent or control, in a way that, gets to explore the juicy inner layers of that onion. Because,
and
yeah.
new counsellors, because I also am a part of the training system at Monash for the new Masters of Counselling students on their placements, and new counsellors, they might have read Carl Rogers till the cows come home.
Yes.
But they're not yet, strengthened in the non-judgmental, unconditional, positive regard.
Yeah.
Even if they don't come out with something, they will say to me in supervision, why don't they just I say, oh, excuse me, that word just, write that down.
Yes.
Every time that pops out of your mouth or comes into your head, that means you can't imagine what it's like for that person. Like someone that's a smoker, people will say, oh, why don't they just stop buying them?
Yeah.
That word just, and it's the same with shoulds and oughts. And people say, oh, I have to go and see my mum. Well, hang on, you choose to, So we kind of like, in narrative therapy, we're attending to how people tell their narratives, because they can tell it in a way that makes them feel powerless, like, oh, I just have to go and go along with that. Whereas if they agree that it's possible to say, well, actually I am choosing that, we say, okay, tell me 3 things that make you feel this is the right thing for you at this time of your life. And I'll often look at my phone, and I'll say, it's 10:44 on the 10th of January 2024. Right now, it feels that that's the choice you're making for what, come up with 3 reasons that align with your values. And they might say, because my mum used to change my nappies and I'm needing to visit her, whatever it is. So there's definitely no blame about anything, but we definitely avoiding even praise in narrative therapy. It's a big no-no. You never say, oh, well done, wow. We say, I'm really curious, how did you do it? What were the steps you took to achieve that?
So it's inner strengths based as opposed to outer strengths based.
Yeah, and client's the expert. That's another underlying thing, the client's the expert.
What drew you to narrative therapy?
Well, when I was in year 12, my mum was actually studying psychology. So I was studying my year 12 things, on the balcony in WA on a beanbag, and she was next to me on a beanbag
Yeah.
studying all her, psychology texts, and she had little audio cassettes of Frank Farelli, a radical psychologist, amazing guy, and Milton Erickson with all his storytelling and things.
Yeah.
And so, and I'd read through all her, then back in the day, they printed every article then. And I'd be, put aside my physics and chemistry and look at her things. And so right from there, I had this, I just loved it. It was a good fit. When you get that jigsaw piece and you think, I wonder if that fits in the sky. There's one little gap and you kind of put it in, it goes, oh, yes.
It's
just had that comfortable thing. So after I'd done a few other careers, in about 2006, I was working in a country town, and I was working with parents at the local council, helping them manage children's problems. And my manager was a narrative therapist. And she worked with clients, and she said to me after I'd been there just a little while, she said, oh, I've got a final session with one of my clients, and I do something called an outsider witness practice for that last session. I can train you up a bit on it. Would you be willing? So I said, yeah, great. So my role was to sit in while she and her client, or often it was a parent and child, but they had their final little summary of how it'd been and what they'd achieved and what were the difficult parts and all that. And then after about 20 minutes, they both, would look at me, and my role was to go, well, what I was hearing was, and you would talk completely authentically about what you heard, how it hit your heart, everything. You wouldn't, again, no praising.
Yeah.
It was like, oh, when, you said that, my heart just kind of like, oh, it really got me. It was heart-wrenching that you'd experienced that, but then you decided to come and get the support, and then my heart kind of softened. And then, I would do my somatic thing. I'm a bit of a somatic psychotherapist as well. But so she introduced me to narrative approaches bit by bit. And then I said, look, I think I want to do a degree in narrative therapy. And she said, great, because whatever you start with, whatever degree you go and do to start with, that's your default.
Yeah.
So when you're tired on a Friday morning with your client, you'll default to whatever was the very first theoretical modality that you were trained in.
Yeah.
So I went down to the Bouverie Centre at La Trobe University, had a little centre called the Bouverie Centre, and I did this grad cert narrative therapy in about 2008. And then, a couple of years later, did my master's of counselling just at another university. And then I think it was 2015, I did my master's in narrative therapy. Because if you're not practicing it, if you don't work with colleagues that practice it and you're kind of like in that kind of thing, it's not actually an intuitive thing. It's not as simple as the Carl Rogers approach. There's a lot of technical things with all the horrible jargon that goes along with it, like there's something called remembering. It's one of my most favorite techniques to use, and they spell it like re-membering, like it's that kind of thing. It's like the jargon will do your head in if you were starting to go and learn narrative therapy. But it doesn't matter what the name is. What happens is, we're talking to someone, and again, we're interested in, is there someone in your life who first saw that you were struggling with this problem? We can call it the ADHD problem. Was there someone when you were a little kid who, maybe it's a family member, maybe it was a teacher, maybe it's a friend or a sibling, parent, I don't know. Was there someone that kind of just got it that you were struggling with a problem that was different from other people's problems? And people will often say, even adults will often say things like, oh, it was my grandma. Oh, and I'll say, what's her name? Marjorie. Is she still alive? No. Okay, well, look, I wonder would you be open to Marjorie sitting here using the Gestalt empty chair? Would you be open to Marjorie sitting here and we can have a chat to her?
Yeah.
And they say, okay, it doesn't matter if it's online or in person. And I'll say, oh, Marjorie, I say, you've been eavesdropping,
Rude.
And I say, oh, what's it like for you to know that, Shannon still
Mm.
remembers there was a certain look or gesture or something that you communicated to her that made her feel that she was valued and loved and not a problem. How does that make you feel? And then I turn back to Shannon and say, what would she say?
Yeah, what do you
So I,
hear?
I don't speak for the
Mm.
family member. And she'll say, oh, she was just my grandma would have said, she's just a sweet one. She's so
Yeah,
kind. And
yeah.
I'll say, oh my gosh. And then we might have a back and forward, but that's remembering. We're bringing someone from the membership of the club of people who love us. We're
Mm.
bringing them back, remembering into our little membership.
I mean, it just sounds like it's I am not one for I remember studying Gestalt when I was training and I was like, it's all right. Um, I mean, every methodology has its pros and cons. But the way that it sounds like it integrates with narrative therapy almost brings out the beauty in what can be a really awkward, weird exercise for people in the
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
To me, narrative therapy is all about love. Now,
yeah,
Michael White and David Epstein wouldn't have spoken like that in the 80s because,
yeah.
the last thing they would have wanted to do to advance this new therapeutic way of working would be to be considered hippies.
Yeah,
Although they both looked a bit like that, I must say.
yeah,
I think in essence, and they never used the word spirit or
yeah.
spiritual. They're very careful to fit in because it was a difficult time. But really, the more I work with narrative therapy, the more I realize it's about love. In that moment, listening to the client, I love them. I've got a grandson and a
Yeah,
granddaughter, but I've got a grandson who's 5. And the way I love him when he's with me, he spends weekends with me, and we go camping and stuff. The
yeah,
way I'm with him, I'm just with him, not
yeah.
looking at my phone,
Mm,
out in nature or playing games or whatever it is. I'm with it. I'm like that with my clients. Now, how did I learn that? Because in the training videos, in the training in narrative therapy, that's what we witnessed.
mm.
David Epstein and Michael White were in a love bubble with their clients.
Yeah, it's like just presence, like what being present is so undervalued, I think, in
Yeah,
general. And, I will always say to my clients, 80% of what happens in this room is about how we relate to one another. And so that's got to be there. We can
yeah,
call it the therapeutic relationship or gelling with your therapist or whatever language feels comfy. But essentially, it's just rooted in somebody feeling like they're being witnessed almost and seen and heard and all of those really warm and fuzzy feelings, but not in a cliche way, like in a
no, no,
real present, nothing else matters in this next 50 minutes to an hour, but what comes out of your mouth. And
yeah,
that's a real it's a real privilege to sit in there as a
yeah.
therapist, but it's also, it's a really beautiful moment because for some people that would be the first time that's ever happened.
And it is a spiritual thing. I remember when I first
Yeah.
started studying this, asking my tutor at the time, oh, this sounds a bit spiritual. And he went, no,
Yeah.
no, 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 no. You know?
Yeah.
But I was a student in high school studying physics in particular. That was my passion. And my teacher at the time was this old guy. He looked like someone from medieval times, and he would sit and talk to me after the class finished about quantum theory. I was
Mhm.
fascinated by quantum, which is where you can't measure mass, it's energy, energy, energy. And
Yeah.
so over the years, I've been accumulating knowledge about that. And what happens in the session
Mm,
is a scientifically known thing around the quantum field, where,
yeah.
they talk about the butterfly here and that affects, a tornado over there or whatever.
Mm,
So my energy in the session is is something that's part of this cosmic energy. It's huge. I say
yeah.
to people, you've got a mobile phone. What would happen if you didn't charge it overnight?
Mm,
Didn't plug it in or whatever? Oh, it wouldn't go. Okay, so tell me, how do you get charged overnight?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and this is what I do. I kind of bring to people's awareness the miracle of the energy that's in the room.
Mm,
So again, I've done some somatic psychotherapy, so I kind of feel that too.
mm,
But to me, it's a part of narrative therapy because it's so much around this love that these guys, the presence, as you said, when they're with these families they were working with, it was like a devotion to
mm,
not to solve the problem,
yeah.
but to be with these clients and and not to be eager for a solution or to
Mm,
solve any problem, but to be with them.
yeah.
And again, Michael White used this lovely term. He said, "Oh, I'm loitering with intent."
I
You
love
know,
that.
I
That's
know.
great. Okay, now when I ask this question of people who are here to talk about a particular way that they work, the answer is nearly almost everyone. But I'm going to ask it anyway. Who does narrative therapy benefit?
Well, I would say it benefits the cosmic bubble of love
Okay.
because there's not the judgment in there. There's this
Mm,
client-centered reverence.
yeah.
And so to me, it's more than
Mm,
everyone.
yeah.
It's all beings, I'm thinking of like now from a Buddhist perspective,
Mm,
all living beings benefit.
yeah. Are there particular presentations that people might bring to therapy that benefit this approach more than others?
I mean, I've been researching narrative therapy for a long time. There's a lot of research out there, articles out there from people who've worked with, people with schizophrenia,
Mm,
bipolar disorder, all different presentations, people working in prisons. I mean, I've also worked for 3 years in men's behavior change programs
yeah.
as a co-facilitator. And, you know, I think because the approach is so broad, there's so many different kind of tools in the toolbox of narrative therapy
Mm,
that you bring certain ones out. Um, that I think there's no one that it wouldn't benefit.
yeah.
Even like children that are on the spectrum that maybe not so verbal.
Yeah.
Narrative therapy can be quite verbal,
Mm,
but I make it visual, especially online. I use the Zoom whiteboard all the
yeah.
time. I document. I'll pull up the Zoom whiteboard. I'll say, okay, what are your 3 top problems? And
Mm,
we might draw something there or whatever. And if it's in person, I make it visual. I'm a big one on timelines. So
mm,
even if it's an 8-year-old child who's been struggling, not sure how to live amongst the bullies in the playground,
yeah.
we might draw a timeline. And the
Mm,
timeline might be just what the one day. Let's look at one day. What happens in one day? Um, but we draw it, and
yeah.
so narrative therapy's got these visual things as well. They've got the tree of life, where each
Ah,
part of the
I
tree
know.
represents.
Yeah, I know this. It's actually
Yes,
it seems very simple on the surface, but it
I
is
know,
very deep and it's a
very
really
deep.
beautiful exercise to do.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
train people in that.
Yeah.
I work. I'm contracted by the Sydney Centre for Creative Change, and that's one of the most popular trainings I deliver. And I
Yeah.
always make sure there's no more than 18 in this online because it's an intimate thing, especially the roots. I always say to people,
Yeah.
trigger warning, kind of thing. When we come to the roots, even you as professional counselors will have something happen within you, and it will
Mm,
be the belly, the heart, everything. Something will happen, and you'll think, I don't know if I could even stay online now,
mm,
because a lot of our own struggles are from childhood, family, and that's what the roots represent. So it's
yeah.
deep stuff, but people are very. I think it works because it's visual as well.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
a lot of men haven't taken to the tree of life, so I've developed something called the sailboat of life.
Okay.
And one of the things that gave me the courage to do that under the narrative therapy banner is again, Michael and David, when they were setting up, they said they wanted this freedom to explore, various ideas and practices. And they said that the important thing for them was that this whole thing, whatever it ended up being called, would carry the spirit of adventure for the practitioner to
Mm,
evolve and develop. So when I realized that a lot of men weren't really drawn to drawing a tree,
Yeah.
I created this sailboat, which also had some safety aspects. Like, for example, you've got a male client who has got a lot of that's happened, and they're not really sure whether life is going to be for them moving forward.
Mm.
So if I bring this sailboat image, they draw the sailboat, and I'll say, okay, so you're setting off on your voyage. I mean, every day we set off on a voyage.
Mm.
So if you're setting off on a voyage for a big journey, are you going to bother with a life jacket? I go, yeah. Okay, so that'll be in the hold. Okay, what about a personal alarm or UHF or whatever? Oh, yeah. I'll say, why? Why would you bother?
Mm.
Well, because it can get dangerous out there. Okay, well, look, life
Yep.
can get dangerous. So I'll say, so what have you got in place right now in your
Mm.
life that's your safety equipment?
Yeah.
So the tree of life is more of this lovely strength-based, nothing to do with the problem really, but
Mm.
mine includes a conversation about the problem, like the weather,
Yeah.
um, and things like that. And I always have a little shark underneath, and I'll say, okay, draw a shark underneath, and right next to the shark, 3 of your biggest fears or worries. So I've got a little
Mm.
kid of 8 saying, they're worried about this new teacher who's shouting a lot.
Yeah.
Or you've got someone that's 40 saying, I'm fear my wife's going to leave me. And you just
Yeah.
say, next to the chart, write down your 3 biggest fears. And again, it's this disinhibition that happens when you're doing a drawing.
Mm.
You might not say it if I ask the question without the drawing,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
people express more when it's visual.
Yeah, and I think when it's we know even with parts work when it's externalized that it sort of desensitizes it a little bit.
Yeah,
You increase the distance between you and whatever the painful problem or situation or event is. And so it's all about how you can then hold it. You're holding it differently. It's not heavy. You're looking at it. You're looking at it with
yeah,
outside eyes.
with some
Uh,
safe
yeah,
distance.
yeah, absolutely.
And in narrative therapy, we call it repositioning. So we
Mm.
invite the client to reposition
Yeah,
spatially, so to speak, and they sit with us looking at the problem.
yeah,
And we might even say, let's put this problem under the spotlight.
yeah, yeah. I will always say to my clients, what lens are you looking at it from?
Yeah,
And it's the same, like it's a similar sort of thing. Even when I'm working
yeah,
with a couple, I'll go, you're both, the tree is still a tree. You're just looking at it from different angles, right? So
yeah,
let's just
yeah,
explore the angle that you're looking at it from.
yeah.
Um, I I will say though, if you drew a shark under my sailboat, one of the fears would have been the shark. So,
Yeah,
um, but I think, and you've already sort of started to give a really great picture of what narrative therapy looks like in the room. Does that look different? For different presentations or problems, or we still sort of using the same techniques with
yeah.
different
Using
people?
the same. Look, if it's a couple and they come in and they say, oh, look, he criticizes me all the time.
Mm.
We can say, so how is criticism injuring, hurting this relationship?
Yeah.
Or a child's coming in after there's been a trauma with anxiety come the evening because the trauma had happened in the evening. So after dinner, the
Mm.
child, I'm picturing this 8-year-old client I had,
Yeah.
and the incident that the parents were also traumatized. They called it the night of terror, and
Mm.
this 8-year-old said, "Oh no, it was the night of the great escape because we got away." Oh, right,
Oh,
So we found a name that wasn't just uh, experience near. It was an
yeah.
uplifting name, and so and again he worked with me and his parents and stuff like that. And what he really wanted was to have some kind of happiness at home because
Mm.
this problem had robbed him of some happiness, and he'd been left with the worries. So he and I worked with a few ideas, parents helped, and then at the end of our work together, um, and again, I was talking to you a bit earlier about there's no such thing as termination of your work
Yeah.
with the client. it goes on forever. I know from time to
Mm.
time, not that this child would be thinking of me
Mm.
personally, but would
Yeah.
know that he went to see someone and the problem changed shape and
Healing.
looked different. And on that last session, they came in and he said that his happiness at home had increased from 6 out of 10 to 9 out of 10. And
Oh.
he said the worries were only a whisper.
Oh, what a beautiful picture.
I know, I know.
Oh,
So all this language, see, it's unusual language, isn't it?
yeah.
But kids get it. Kids are really,
Absolutely. Yeah, and I wonder whether I often will talk about the fact that the older we get, unless we actually use the left side of our brain, that emotional, imaginative, creative side of our brain, we fall into the trap of trying to reason and logic our way out of things, and that just is not always the best solution.
yeah.
Sometimes it's not a solution at all. Um, why is rewriting that narrative or rewriting a story, your own story, so powerful for someone?
I mean, it's hard to explain, but I did see something interesting on Instagram that relates to this. There was a guy on stage with a volunteer from the audience, and he said to this woman, "Okay, tell me something you really can't do. Is it you couldn't jump from with a parachute, or you couldn't do some public speaking. Tell me something
Yeah.
that you really I can't." And she had a thing, and then she said, I can't swim far out in deep water, right? And he says,
Yeah.
okay, and he got her to put her arm out straight horizontally to her shoulder, and he pushed it, and it went collapse, right?
Mm.
And then he said, okay, now I want you to change the word can't to can,
Mm.
and just say that a couple of times. I can swim out into deep water. I can swim out, and put your arm up again. And it was immovable.
Mm.
Now, that's to me is an example of the power of the words we tell ourselves.
Yeah.
And so people might feel like they're a failure. People often come to counseling because they feel like a failure, they feel guilty about something or ashamed, blame themselves. But the thing is, they with narrative therapy, they come to this point where they've discovered these unique, sparkling attributes that they've been nurturing. They
Mm.
discover what's important to them, and we help them weave that into the fabric of their identity.
Yeah.
And that shifts because they realize, and they straight away shame lifts with kids,
Mm.
adults. That's the thing with narrative therapy. Shame just goes poof,
Yeah.
might come back again. We
Yeah.
work on it again, but it's people can go when they tell
Mm.
their narrative from a strength-based identity, what's important to them, values, perspective.
Yeah, I think it just it makes me think of Gabor Mate's compassionate inquiry, where
Oh
it's
yeah.
about shifting that, you are the best person to help you. Why use negative self-talk? Why are we not using self-compassion? And obviously he does that in a much more gentle way than I just did. But
Yeah.
it's so much about, the things that we say to ourselves, because we often will say, oh, I would never tell somebody else that. I would never do that. Okay, well, why do we say it to ourselves? And so I guess it's engaging that self-compassion part of ourselves
Mm,
as in trusting that we are the best person, that we have all of the inner strength and skills and abilities already there.
yeah.
It's just about activating it.
Yeah.
Um, okay, this is my favorite part of the episode, which is what myth are we smashing about narrative therapy?
Well, I mean, for me, it's the way narrative therapists respond to any problem that's discussed or anything that comes up in a session. So if
Mm.
you if you think about a problem, you could have 12 different people with 12 different modalities sitting in a circle, and there's this problem that the client has in the middle.
Mm.
And I'm thinking of the one that's a very common thing. Again, when people come to me in supervision, they'll say to me, "Oh, this client's really resistant."
Mm.
you know? Now,
Yeah.
if it's at a counselling service where the client hasn't paid,
Mm.
yeah, um, and the counsellor just can't seem to, after many sessions, bring the person to talk about something that could be beneficial and create significant change, right?
Mm,
That's quite different to someone that's paying to see you privately,
absolutely.
right? So these things are always contextual. But the thing is, I'll ask this question to everyone listening and you. You get a phone ringing, you don't recognize the number, but you are expecting a call from maybe a new client. So you're thinking, shall I answer it? I don't know.
Yep.
So you answer it, and the person says, "Oh, hi, I'm from the bank," and that's your bank, and they go, "Look,
Yep.
we've got a bit of a problem.
Mm.
Can you jump online now with me, and you need to change your password,
Mm.
right?" You go, no,
Yeah.
right? You're protecting something here, aren't you? You're not sure, but
Mm.
you're protecting. So that's the thing. When a scam caller comes along, we ain't going to share our passwords
Yeah.
until there's a verification. I might say, okay, tell me your number. I'm going to call you back.
Mm.
Also, you know what I mean? You'd
Put
verify.
safeguards in. Yeah.
Absolutely. Or
Yeah.
send me an email,
Yes.
or whatever it is, we'd work on something. So every client that comes to see us, even those that are coming and they're not paying a fee, or those that are paying a fee, it doesn't matter. Even if it's in a couple, people often say, "Oh, the wife's really this, but the husband's
Mm.
guarded and resistant." It's like, hang on. You know what they're doing is something's happening somatically in them, and they're protecting that by
Yeah.
holding back, feeling safe. Yes, it might be some maladaptive thing from childhood.
Mm.
Shut up or you'll get in trouble, or
Yeah.
you'll be judged if you say this, or if you cry, you'll be seen as.
Mm.
So whenever a client isn't doing what we want them to do, open up,
Yeah.
that's our job. People are, they come in all dreamy-eyed and say, when they're first starting in counselling, I'll say, "Oh, how come you came to be a counsellor? What was driving it?" "Oh, I want to help people." And they
Mm.
go, "Oh, well, you better go and be a social worker,"
Ah.
because you can't guarantee you'll be helping people in this job,
Yeah.
and you also won't see the outcomes often. It'd
No.
be decades down the track. So maybe you can think about this as being, I'm going to be available with the skills
Mm.
I've got through counselling to be with someone as they walk through this short period of their lives. But
Yeah.
yeah, so again, it's this whole thing of, we can judge it when the client doesn't give us something we know we think might help, or we want. So that,
Mm.
again, for me, and again, this is a real narrative therapy thing. There's no way we would internalize a word like a resistant client. We
Mm.
would say in supervision, we'd go, "Oh, there must be something happening inside that this client is needing to protect.
Mm.
It's a precious thing that's happening. I'm witnessing this really special thing."
Yeah. It's a really different way of looking at it, isn't it? But it's a really, I can imagine, I've not ever worked with a narrative therapist myself, but I could imagine that it would be a really soft place to land, a really soft, gentle place to sit in. And that doesn't necessarily mean that it's easy, but when you are dealing with pain and emotion and grief and trauma, you want gentleness. You want gentleness, because sometimes that's really difficult. And it is, I um, work with religious trauma. And so I know full well, even personally, about the impact of indoctrination. And so it sometimes is a default setting that has been almost like a pre-programmed in like a computer system. It's already there. When you get your phone and there's already
Yes.
apps on there and you're like, what is this? Why do I need this? What purpose is this?
Yeah.
And it's sort of going, that part is just protecting something else. And often when I used to use the word resistance early on, I very quickly realized that actually it's not the client being resistant. It's that's a me thing. That's a me problem here.
Yeah.
But that's, that's something that counselors develop over time.
Yes.
They realize that actually a client's resistance is probably just a part of you being activated, that's
Yeah.
uncomfortable just sitting and witnessing what is happening. But
And with children, we use like such playful approaches again, which is,
yeah.
David and Michael is one thing that, we can. I mean, Michael died maybe 15 years ago, but one
Mm,
thing that was there, whether working with adults or children, was the little playfulness with adults, but huge playfulness with kids.
yeah.
Like Michael White's, seminal paper about encopresis, which is when children have this fecal soiling and they, have this compacted, you know, poo in their lower gut there,
Mm,
their bowels, and no medicine moves this stuff. By the time it gets that bad, it's like rock hard in the belly. It's a
yeah.
terrible thing. And one day he in his work with a family at the hospital, he just said, "Oh, have you got the sneaky poo problem as well?"
Ah,
And they said, "Oh, what do you mean? What do you mean? Yeah, think maybe this is it. Mum and Dad are there. Yeah, actually, what is it?" And he says,
yeah.
"Oh, I've seen a few other children like this, and this poo sneaks out a bit round the sides, and you think, I didn't push that out. And there's the
Yeah.
smelly underpants. Oh my God!" And so he created this whole way of responding to encopresis,
Mm,
not as a medical thing, but
yeah.
as a playful, um, cheeky way to get the problem changing. And he had such success with it.
Mm, that's amazing. I mean, I like I said, I'm doing a podcast on story, and so I love the power of story. I think it is a powerful force in this world,
Yeah,
aside from, nourishment and shelter and, all of the
yeah,
basic needs in
yeah,
life. What we need is story, and to be able to, sit with people's stories and hear them and witness them and learn from them. And I think it's what makes the universe go round and continue, is just the movement of story. So I love that. Thank you so much for joining me.
it'd be my pleasure.
It's been great. I hope more people, sort of seek out understanding narrative therapy, or at least just um, maybe look at the way that they approach their sessions with their clients differently, and the way that they witness and remain present. Narrative therapy is not everybody's approach, but it doesn't mean I tend to be I just like to take things from wherever I can get them. I'm
Oh,
that
look, I'm the
person.
same. I'm
Yeah.
the same. Yeah,
Yeah. And so I hope, even, for new counselors as well, maybe that some of that learning can come a little bit earlier for them, around
yeah,
sitting and witnessing and just being in the room. I use the term in the room, and being in the room is a real
mm.
privilege. So
And
yeah,
again, coming back to that heart, I
yeah,
think the heart of the counselor is so vital. I
yeah,
picture my heart as a nest,
mm,
because we think about the room. Again, quantum theory, there's no such thing as space, right?
yeah,
And
yeah,
so it's all imaginary, kind of real. It's made out. It feels like this space. It's like
mm,
we don't feel we're mostly made of water. It's like it's all
no,
crazy. But if you put your hand on your heart and think, my heart's a nest to hold that client.
yeah,
That's, to me, that's what it's about. It's
mm,
activating the heart, and that ticks the box with Carl Rogers,
mm,
Eugene Gendlin, who he did that focusing work. He
yeah,
and Carl Rogers were buddies, which led to the somatic psychotherapy, which is
mm,
huge,
yes,
massive. And it's this heart. This is an
yeah.
organ that's still developing in us.
Beautiful approach, and a non-pathologizing approach, which is what we want, I think. So thank you. It's been wonderful. We hope you enjoyed joining us inside the therapy room. Thanks for listening.